So we're going to do this log now. So I have got colours 107, which is a sand colour, which we're going to use as our base, 102, 99, 242 and 244. All right, and I've got my blender ready just in case I want to use it. So 107 sand is the first thing we're going to do, and we're going to use those small circular movements, and we're going to go in and we're going to colour the whole thing with this lighter base. Because when you look at the way that this has been drawn, it's quite light right the way through here. So we're going to use this 107 to create that light. So just take your time. Small circles, just very lightly touching that cardstock, because we're going to do a lot of layers here. So don't press down to speed up, just use that nib and let that ink flow naturally. We're just going to work nice and slowly and fill that colour in. It's going to be a slightly different technique to the one that we learned. Well, it's going to be a quite different technique full stop from the wood that we did in the textures, because that was like an open grain wood, so you could actually see all the grain inside, whereas this is a log or a trunk. So you're looking at the bark with this, not the inside of the wood itself. So it's going to be a different technique. Now, can you imagine what this would look like if this pen got darker every time it went over itself? You just wouldn't be able to get that lay down of that first layer really smooth and even. And that's what we really want. A nice, smooth, even layer. We've actually given you in your boxes 2 of this number 107, because we knew that some of them you would need quite a lot. And we're going to use it in hair and fur and different things like that. So if you're looking at thinking I've got 2 of the same, you have on some of the colours, because they're the ones that you're going to need to use the most for your classes and for your practice. So there is a reasoning behind it. And we're just filling in that area there, right the way along. Right, so I've got my first layer down. So then I'm going to look at my colour chart, and I can see I've got 107, and I'm going to use 102 next, because it's not too dark. So I'm going to add a little bit more depth and dimension in now with 102. So if I just show you that colour, it's quite a soft brown. And then I'm just going to go in, I'm going to start to colour at the end, bearing in mind that I'm going to go over with darker colours here as well, but I'm just adding a little bit in. There, all right, but I'm leaving a little bit of light. It might not be there at the end, but it might be. So let's just leave a space for that ink. And then really what I'm doing is just following Lauren's black stamp lines, okay? And I'm kind of doing it in a texture. So I'm kind of dotting a little bit, but not like this. I'm just kind of keeping the nib on and just very gently moving that nib quite randomly, but making sure that I'm not leaving any white bits at the top. Okay, and at this stage, you know, an odd white bit here and there isn't going to matter, because we're going to go over it again anyway. But I'm just then going to follow down like we did on the hills a little bit. Just follow down in some of these areas with that colour. So what we're doing is we're going to make it darker at the top and the bottom, so that it looks like it's round, like, you know, like that cylinder shape of a log, tree. I'm going to do that by creating that effect with our light to dark colours. And then we're going to go in behind these reeds, because they're going to be darker down there. And this is still the lightest of the darker colours, so don't worry about laying that colour down. And then coming back from under here. And this is also giving the next colour a layer to blend into. I'm just going to move my work to make it comfortable. It's interesting, when I'm at work, obviously I colour in on the desk, and when I'm doing the classes I'm on this table, but when I'm at home I do like to sit in a chair, like a comfy chair, with like a drawing, like the cushions, the lap trays you can get, one of those on my knee, because I find I can sit up a bit better that way, and if I'm doing loads, which I do on a regular basis, I find that comfortable. So you'll find your comfortable position. Right, I know that looks quite strange at the moment, but it'll all blend through. So I'm now going to look at the colour chart again, and I think I've done 107 and 102. I think I'm going to go into 244, which is a little bit warmer. It's got a tiny bit more red in than the 242, but not as much as the 91. So I'm just going to go into 244, I think. And again, I'm going to work in this darker colour here. And I might not use all of the colours that I've got out. You know, as I colour in and the picture starts to come to life, I can judge it then as to where I want more, or if I don't want more, or if I want less, and I can take a bit out. So the great thing about alcohol markers is when it's down, it's not permanent. You know, you can move it, you can change your mind, which is brilliant. Because I think a lot of the fear of colouring comes from when you've done it, if you don't do it right, you've got to start again. Whereas with alcohol pens, it's different because you can move that colour. But if you've never been taught that, or if the flow of the ink is too fast, it's much, much, much harder to then be able to do that. And especially if your pen's getting darker, because as you're going over to blend it out, your lightest colour's getting darker, so it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't work. And then when you understand how alcohol pens work, and you realise that it's not possible to get a seamless blend with a marker that isn't as good as these are, then you realise that it's not you, it's actually the tools that you've been using. And I do believe that anybody at all can colour, you know. You just have to be patient and work that ink and take your time and practice, because it is practice. And then I might just go in with a little bit of the 242 just to add that little bit darker area, just around here where it's going into that landscape, and right along kind of the edges at the top and the bottom, and just pushing that ink in there where it would be a little bit darker, following those sketch lines that's already in your stamp. It's much easier to use a product or a tool when you know how they work, funnily enough, because then it makes sense in your brain and you can think, oh yeah, well that makes sense because that's why I wasn't getting that blend through. and now I am. So yeah. Right, I'm going to go back to 244 just very briefly and just soften those lines that I've just put in. And to be fair, it's almost blended by itself, but just as good practice, just go in and soften that through slightly, okay? Gets you used to that habit of when you put ink down, blending it back through. Right, so I'm going to go back to 102. Yep, 102. Sorry, I have to remind myself of the numbers. And then I'm going to work that colour in. And then you can see there's quite a difference between the browns that we've put down and that sand that we put down at the beginning. So we're going to work quite hard and get this colour out, this mid colour in, and we're going to soften this through. All right, so we're going to work quite hard at this. And if it doesn't happen immediately, just keep going, move along, let the alcohol do its work in one area, because we can always come back to it. And we want texture in this area, because the bark of the tree isn't smooth by any stretch of the imagination. So we're going to really work that colour through, okay? And if you're sitting there thinking that's never going to happen, just keep going, because we've got another few tricks up our sleeve that we've learnt already that we can use. I'm just going to work that ink across there. And slow down a bit. Give that ink time to work. Just soften that colour through, okay? Like that. Right, so I'm now going to go to 102 and I'm going to pick a little bit of that up on my 107 and I'm going to use that as a means to be able to soften out that area, okay? So I'm coming a little bit further into where we laid the light down in the first place, and I'm going to go across some areas like this. So I'm breaking up that light area, okay? And I'm adding in texture. And I love doing this because it just changes it completely and it gives you that extra colour to be able to soften through with. And look at the difference there already. That's amazing, just by adding in that little bit of colour. Remember, brush out both pens, then it disappears. And now I can go back in with my 107 and I can soften that, and that's a much easier blend. Plus I've added a little bit of texture in there by mixing those two colours together. And you can see now I'm kind of doing this, so I'm showing you here, I'm kind of doing this. So I'm not doing this, I'm keeping it quite close together, but I'm just moving and laying that ink down. So it gives that texture on that tree bark there. Okay. I'm quite happy with that, I think. And then this little bit on the end here, just soften that through. And then you can go in right at the edges where you put that darker colour and just dot here and there, just drag that pale colour through, just to add a little bit of texture. So if it looks a little bit blocky in any areas, just go through and soften it out, okay? Like that, a little bit in there, just because there might be a little bit of light peeping through. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to show you what we've done. Remember, this hasn't evaporated yet, so it will be slightly lighter, but I'm going to lift that up and show you. And then I might come back and do a bit more after I've added the sky in. But again, because you've got that stark contrast of the path underneath and the white at the top where the sky is going to go, let's put those two things in first, and then we can revisit and decide if we want any more depth in there. All right, so I'm going to put the browns away. We want your warm greys out. So I kind of want warm grey 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So all the warm greys that are in lesson 1, let's work with those and let's put the path down. All right, see you in a minute.